Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Today we've got for you an updated High Republic reading guide. This will include Phase 2, and then we will re-go over Phase 1. If you haven't seen our other Phase 1 reading guide, we will go a lot more in-depth in that video on Phase 1 in particular. So we're going to more focus on Phase 2 here, but we will give you a recap of kind of everything we talked about in that video. But we have a lot of different types of reading orders in our Phase 1 video that might help you pick and choose what style you want to read Phase 1 in, because it is a lot more convoluted than Phase 2. If you haven't checked that video out and you are looking for Phase 1 in particular, check that video out. But here we will be going over everything you need to know for Phase 2 and then getting in from Phase 2 into Phase 1. Make sure you're liking the video, though, if you haven't. It really helps us out with the algorithm. Also, subscribe to our channel for more High Republic content. This is our last piece of coverage for Phase 2, but we had a lot of stuff before that. We've covered every single book, comic book, and junior novel in the series. So if you haven't seen our reviews for all that, you can check it out. There is going to be a link to the playlist in this video. Also, stay tuned for our coverage of Phase 3. If you're interested in Star Wars books or comic books in general, that is a big focus of our channel. We do Legends Book Club every single month. We cover Star Wars books often. We are currently working on reading Inquisitor Rise of the Red Blade for you all to have that review out for when it comes out. So keep an eye on Star Wars Lads. Make sure you're subscribed for all the latest Star Wars book content. And we're going to dive into the reading guide here. And as we did last time with Phase 1, we're going to give you two different types of reading orders for the High Republic. So first, we're going to give you the absolute bare bones essentials. These are the things that if you don't read any one of these, you'll probably be lost in certain parts of the High Republic. So Sanak's going to break that down for us. After that, I will give you the exact reading order if you want to read everything, if you're a completionist like us. So Sanak, why don't you run down our Phase 2 essential reads?
Yeah, so we got to obviously start off with the first book in Phase 2, which is Path to Deceit, a young adult novel from Tessa Grattan and Justine Ireland. You really get to explore the path of the open hand, the Jedi's first interactions with them. It's like a religious thriller. I think it's a pretty great read to get into, and honestly, it really sets the tone for a lot of this phase, so obviously you got to read that. Then we move into the first adult novel, which is High Republic Convergence from Zoraida Cordova. When you read it initially, maybe if you read it before Path to Deceit, you might be like, well, I'm not really sure what it's doing for the phase, but it does definitely build up a lot of characters that we get to see further on in these phases, especially in these essential books like Galanatai, Axel Greylark for sure. Next, we move into the Marvel High Republic Phase 2 comic line. This is mostly centered around Battle of Jeddah. There are some issues that are set before then, and where you get to follow Comac Battis and Maddie, and you get to see some of the interactions with the Guardians of Wills and Sorcerers of Tongue and all these other groups before the Path of the Open Hand really comes in. This is where you get to see the Herald story, who's introduced in Path to Deceit. So if you really want to see what he's doing, why he's not really in the remaining books, or at least not to the same extent as he was in Path to Deceit, you definitely have to read this. The next one is, of course, the audio drama, The Battle of Jeddah. This is like the full-scale battle on all the other fronts. You get to see a lot of Jedi like Creighton's son, Ada Forte kind of come into play here. So, and it is very crucial. It is like the middle crux point for everything moving forward, because the next book that we'd recommend reading is The High Republic Cataclysm from Lydia King. Cataclysm definitely elevates every single character, especially Galanatai, Axel Greylark have a crazy interesting story. We get to see some stuff from the fallout of Battle of Jeddah and then everything leading into the Battle of Dalna to really get the full scope of what the Path is doing at this point in the Battle of Dalna, Night of Sorrow. You need to read Path of Vengeance because we need to catch up with Marta Rowe and Yana Rowe, who are some of the biggest leads in Path to Deceit. We get to see their evolution. There's a lot of disturbing things that happen in this book. We also get to see a little bit more Jedi perspectives and kind of leave us at the end of Phase 2 here. So these 6 are essential reads. You read this, you'll basically get everything you want.
So those are the essential books. If you just read those, you'll have the gist of the entire phase. This whole phase is a lot tighter. We're talking weeks and months over this phase instead of almost a year or over a year in Phase 1 with its story. So this is a lot tighter phase and makes each thing cross over a bit more than Phase 1 does. So let's get into the recommended reading order. And again, this is not what you're going to find on Wikipedia. This is not the exact timeline release order. This is how we recommend you read the entire initiative. When you read it in timeline, sometimes there will be things that will spoil other things. And so in Phase 2 especially, release order is more accurate than timeline order for how you're going to get the most enjoyment out of this entire initiative. So that's why we start out with Path of Deceit, even though Convergence technically takes place like a couple weeks before. Path of Deceit introduces not only this phase, but the Path of the Open Hand, who are the main villains of the phase. And even though they are not a huge part of Convergence, which is our second thing we recommend you read, they are in the background and helping orchestrate some of the bad things that are going on in Convergence, some of the conflicts. And therefore, if you have a knowledge of Path of Deceit and what the path is actually like, it will help you enjoy a bit more of the machinations behind the scenes in Convergence. So we do recommend you start out with the young adult novel Path of Deceit by Tessa Grattan and Justina Ireland, and then move into Convergence. Convergence stars completely different characters, almost has no crossover with Path of Deceit, and completely new story. But that path element in the background definitely makes it the second thing you should read. That's an adult novel by Zoraida Cordova. You follow that up with Quest for the Hidden City, which is one of the most removed elements of the entirety of Phase 2. Barely connects to anything in Path of Deceit or Convergence. The reason we recommend you read it third here, though, is there is a bit of perspective from some of the characters that mentions the Irem versus Arana war. So if you don't want to have anything spoiled for you in Convergence, we recommend the third thing you read. After that, you jump into Adventures, which is also pretty much removed from all of Path of Deceit, Convergence, and Quest for the Hidden City. This stars a very young Sav Maligan as a Padawan, a character from High Republic Adventures in Phase 1. She is joining up with Maz Kanata's crew, which features Therm, Scissor Punch, and Dexter Jetstar, and a lot of other fun pirate characters. This is written by Daniel Jose Older, and the first 4 issues are collected in a paperback you could get from Dark Horse. Adventures number 5 will lead up into the Battle of Jeddah, so we do recommend you don't read Volume 2 until much later in the initiative. After that, you would jump into Marvel's Volume 1 of the High Republic Phase 2. This collects issues number 1 through 5. Issues 1 through 5 are also a precursor to the Battle of Jeddah, and will get you introduced to the characters of Vildar Mac and Maddie Catley. After that, we also have a quite disconnected Marvel story. It is called The Blade. It's by Charles Soule, about Porter Engle and Barish, the 2 characters that Charles Soule has kind of created in the past in some of his Marvel work. Barish is a reference to the Barish Vow, which he introduced in Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. You also have The Blade, who is Porter Engle. He is called the Blade of Bardota in Phase 1, and this is kind of his origin story, his backstory. After that, we're going to Tales of Enlightenment, which is a short story series by George Mann, who also wrote Quest for the Hidden City. Here you would read new prospects and a different perspective. They introduce characters from the Battle of Jeddah that play a role in his audio drama he wrote. After that, you would move into George Mann's audio drama, The Battle of Jeddah. This is kind of the fulcrum point for all the Phase 2. Everything either deals with post-Battle of Jeddah or pre-Battle of Jeddah. Unlike Tempest Runner in Phase 1, the Battle of Jeddah is a completely essential part of Phase 2. It also introduces the characters of Creighton Sun and Ada Forte, who are main characters in Cataclysm, the next adult novel that will come down the road. Then we put Marvel's Volume 2. This collects the High Republic Phase 2, number 6 through 10. This takes place concurrently with the Battle of Jeddah, giving you Maddie Catley and Vildar Mac's perspectives of the battle. It also deals more with what the path is doing in the Battle of Jeddah. Adventures Volume 2 is what loosely connects the Adventures line to the rest of Phase 2 of the High Republic. It connects Sav Maligan and Maz Kanata and that storyline all to the Battle of Jeddah. After that, you get back into Tales of Enlightenment, more short stories. It has Unusual Suspect and No Such Thing as a Bad Customer, again, written by George Mann. We're not sure if we have a short story collection for Phase 1's short stories, the Starlight short stories. I would assume eventually this will get collected. After that, you get to Quest of the Jedi, which is a Dark Horse one-shot by Claudia Gray. Quest of the Jedi takes place post-Battle of Jeddah, following Aslan Rel, who's trying to uncover the mystery of why 2 Jedi go missing in Path of Deceit. This is a flashback story, though, and he's doing research in the Jedi archives. After that, you would get into The Nameless Terror by George Mann. This is a 4-issue miniseries from Dark Horse. Stars Master Rock, who is a part of Quest for the Hidden City in George Mann's book there. It deals with a crash landing between Path of the Open Hand members and Jedi who are fighting to survive, the Nameless attacking the Leveler. After that, you would read Cataclysm, which is an adult novel by Lydia Kang. This book, again, ties in characters from all over the initiative, mainly Convergence with Fontu Zin and Ziri Albarn, as well as Gilanatai and Axel Greylark, who's on the cover of this book. You also get the Jedi, Creighton's son, and Ada Forte from the Battle of Jeddah making return appearance here. You got Charwil Roy and Yakin, Yaddle, and Sippa, her youngling that she's mentoring. This is a great book, very action-packed book, and gives us the first real look at the big, huge conflict that covers the last few things of Phase 2. After that, you get into Path of Vengeance. Again, Cataclysm, the perfect way, if you wanted an absolute perfect way to read Cataclysm and Path of Vengeance, would be to alternate almost like every 4 or 5 chapters between the two books. They take place at the exact same time and cover the exact same things. Cataclysm gives us the Jedi perspective. Path of Vengeance gives us the Path perspective. So we're back to the characters of Marta Rowe. We're back to the mother, Yana Rowe. All of those characters are touched upon in here, and we're brought up from where we were with Path of Deceit and the comics and all the other stuff that they're involved in, all the way to the big conflict, the Battle of Dalna. The ending is kind of the more final thing of Phase 2, so that's why we recommend you read it after Cataclysm. It is kind of the thing that pushes us back towards what happens in Phase 1. So we recommend you read it after Cataclysm. It'll also keep you from spoiling some of the crazy chaos that is in Cataclysm book. Then you would read Quest for Planet X, and Quest for Planet X is kind of a secular story. It doesn't really cross over much, but there is a part at the end, a good 3-4 chapters that do cross over a bit with the Battle of Dalna. If you don't want to know anything about what that battle is or what it looks like or what are some of the problems that are going on for the Jedi in that conflict, I would say you read this after you read Cataclysm and Path of Vengeance. It does also take place a little bit post the battle, so if you want to avoid any spoilers, again, kind of like Quest for the Hidden City, if you want to avoid any type of reference to what you might be reading in those other things, I would say read it after Path of Vengeance. Then you would kind of end this whole phase off with the Edge of Balance Precedent. This is a flashback story from the perspective of Marchion Ro in Phase 1. So it's also the last thing you read in Phase 1 if you want to bring it back there, and we'll talk about that in our Phase 1 reading guide part of this video. But it does take place post Battle of Dalna in the High Republic Phase 2. You get catch up with certain characters like Master Arkov, who's in Edge of Balance, and also some of the other characters post Battle of Dalna, and it's an interesting little epilogue to Phase 2. And you'd finish off the whole initiative with the last Tales of Enlightenment story, Last Orders, and then Tales of Light and Life is an anthology young adult series that is coming out later this year. We put it here because as of now, according to Wikipedia, there are stories that take place both during Phase 2, but also after Phase 2 in the time between Phase 2 and Phase 1. So in order to not spoil anything about Phase 2 and the fact that it is kind of the last Phase 2 thing being released, we recommend you read it here as the last thing you read in Phase 2 of the High Republic. So that's our reading order. Give you one last look at it. We're going to move to Phase 1 now, but we recommend reading Phase 1. I think I would say that for sure. Reading Phase 1 first because it does introduce you to the High Republic era. There are a lot of things in Phase 2 that even though they take place 150 years earlier, they're referencing and kind of poking at Easter eggs from Phase 1. And if you haven't read Phase 1, you won't get those Easter eggs. So that's our Phase 2 reading order. Again, if you're reading in timeline order, you read all that stuff before you read Phase 1. But if you want to read in our recommended order, you would then look at what we are going to tell you right now for Phase 1. I'm going to pass it back to Sanak here to start our Phase 1 timeline. He's going to give you guys the essentials for Phase 1.
Light of the Jedi. It's where the great hyperspace disaster happens. We get to see everyone kind of come together, and we get to see the first real structure that now I'll explain. Marchion Ro, the Tempest Runners, the Strikes, the Clouds, and everything. Loden Greatstorm, Belzedifar. A lot of these fan favorites are introduced here. Elzar Mann. It's the book for this whole era, really. Then you want to move into the Dark from Claudia Gray. That's a story that's kind of playing more into the secondary villains of this era, which is the Drengir. This is the scariest they'll ever be. You'll get to meet Reed Silas, Comac Vitus, Orla Jareni. Then you would definitely want to read the High Republic Phase 1 comics. If you're a big fan of Avar Kriss, again, she's not a big role in The Rising Storm, and she's definitely not that big of a role in The Fallen Star. You could also meet Keeve Trennis and Skier, and Keeve Trennis is pretty interesting. If you just read Into the Dark and then you read these comics, you'll get probably the most intimidating versions of the Drengir and the most complicated. Then moving into The Rising Storm, Battle of Valo with the Great High Republic Fair. It's an insane battle sequence. You get to see some fan favorites like Rom Jamorum, Ty York with her connection with Elzar, who really is the star of this book. You get to see a lot more Nile machinations. You get to see Marchion really get into more and more of that villainous role. And then you're going to move into The Fallen Star. We both think that this is a little bit of a weaker book in comparison to those first two, which are excellent S tier levels. All of Wave 3 is focused focused on Starlight Beacon and its destruction. If you want to see what's happening, its actual destruction, you want to see all the casualties, the Jedi and everyone on the station, this is the book for you. It's very sad, it's very depressing, but it's also really well written by Claudia Gray as well. But the true story really ends in Eye of the Storm 1 and 2. Those are essential reads because you get to see Mark Monroe's history, his whole family history. The second issue is where you get to see the real end of his story. It's a great story. You get to see Planet X for the first time as well, with all the Nameless and the more power that he's accumulating. And it's a strange, chaotic, creative cliffhanger to phase 1. Definitely check these 6 essential reads out.
Those were the things that you definitely need to read in phase 1, and you might want to take that advice a little bit more strongly than phase 2, because there's a lot in phase 1 and it crisscrosses a lot, and I know this will look overwhelming. We've gotten so many questions on our phase 1 how to read video as well, and I'm expecting a lot more in this video about why we separate certain things. If you listen here, I will let you know why we separate certain things in different ways. Dark Horse acquiring Star Wars license is going to make it a little bit easier to get your hands on most of these stories now, and now removed from, we did this over a year ago in our phase 1 video. A lot of this stuff hadn't gotten published or released in collections yet. So looking back now in June of 2023, we are a lot further along collecting the entirety of phase 1 than we were in March of 2022 when we did our last video. So let's get into the recommended reading order, and we start with Light of the Jedi. Again, like Path of Deceit, technically the first thing in the reading order would be the first couple chapters of Into the Dark if you're doing by timeline order, but we're doing recommended. And Light of the Jedi, like Path of Deceit, sets the entirety of this phase. It gives you the main conflict of the first wave of phase 1, and it sets you forward with a lot of the main characters who in all the other material introduces the main villain, Markion Ro and the Nile. So you have to start with Light of the Jedi. There's no other way to do it. It is the best thing to start with. Then you would move into Starlight Go Together. This is a 2-part short story that features characters that are in Light of the Jedi. They do make appearances there. This can be found in a short story collection that has since been published since we made our last video, called Starlight Stories. After that, you have The Great Jedi Rescue, which was a children's book. This features Burryaga, the Wookiee Jedi Padawan. A Test of Courage follows that up, which takes place at the same time as Light of the Jedi. Great disaster is felt there, introduces the characters of Vernestra Rwoh and Imri Kantaros. We do say this is our favorite of the junior novels in the High Republic, and if there was one you should read, especially now with the Acolyte coming out and Vernestra Rwoh being confirmed to be in the Acolyte, if you want to get her full story, you would read it here in A Test of Courage and continue it throughout the initiative. After that is Into the Dark, and like Sanak mentioned, this is our first YA novel. This is written by Claudia Gray, and it introduces the Drengir. It's where that whole secondary conflict starts, and a lot of the young adult characters are introduced here as well, like Comac Vitus, Reith Silas. After that, you get into the High Republic Volume 1. This is issues 1 through 5. We're going to specify the issues because it's going to get a little hectic here later, but this story is nice and tightly told here in this spot. Picks up off of Into the Dark and continues the Drengir problem. You're going to want to read that there. After that, you read High Republic Adventures 1 through 5. This is collected in either the High Republic Adventures Volume 1 trade paperback from IDW, if you can still get that. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but don't worry, later this year, Dark Horse is going to be collecting the entirety of the High Republic Adventures in one single big paperback called the High Republic Adventures, The Complete Phase 1. After that, you get to the next 2 Starlight stories, First Duty and Hidden Danger. Again, you can collect those in Starlight Stories. That will take you into Phase 1, Wave 2, which begins with The Rising Storm. The Rising Storm is a big, action-packed second book, darker second book in the High Republic. Introduces, really for the first time as a main character, Stellan Gios, and we get Elzar Mann, more perspective from him, also introducing the character of Ty Yorick, a Jedi monster hunter. We get Race to Crash Point Tower after that. That is written by Daniel Jose Older. It's a junior novel. It does take place concurrently with The Rising Storm, so you will not want to read it before The Rising Storm, but after The Rising Storm. After that, you read the High Republic Adventures Free Comic Book Day from 2021. Again, this can be collected in the High Republic Adventures Volume 2 by IDW, or it will be collected in the High Republic Adventures Complete Phase 1 as well. Next, you would get into the children's book Showdown at the Fair. Again, Buryaga's perspective from the Battle of Valo. Then you would jump to a completely different thing. It's The Edge of Balance Volume 1. This was the first manga in the High Republic. It also featured some new characters like Master Arkoff and the Jedi named Lily, as well as her Padawan. Next is The Monster of Temple Peak, which is a story about Ty Yorick, who is introduced in The Rising Storm. Technically takes place earlier in the timeline. It probably takes place before everything in the High Republic timeline in Phase 1, but because the character of Ty Yorick is introduced in The Rising Storm, and this comic kind of relies on you having some knowledge of who she is and what she does, this miniseries, 4-issue miniseries by Cavan Scott, is best read here after you read The Rising Storm. That was not collected for a while. It was supposed to be a standalone trade paperback graphic novel. It eventually was released in 4 issues from IDW and then was collected in a paperback only overseas, not in the United States, and now will be collected in its own paperback by Dark Horse later this year. You can read The High Republic number 6 through 8 next. This is collected in The High Republic Volume 2 from Marvel, or you can get the High Republic Omnibus, which is coming out later this year. It will also collect the first 5 issues. After that, you jump over to 6 through 7 of the High Republic Adventures, again collected in High Republic Adventures Volume 2 by IDW, or the High Republic Adventures Complete Phase 1 from Dark Horse later this year. After that, you would read the Life Day number 1 one-shot. This does feature a story with Buri Yaga. Currently, this can either be found as a single issue or it is collected in the Han Solo and Chewbacca Volume 1. After that, you would read Halcyon Legacy Volume 1. This features a story from Buri Yaga as well. This can be collected in its own Halcyon Legacy miniseries trade paperback. Only the first issue is needed for the High Republic. It is a flashback story as well, so you don't necessarily have to read it. Then you jump into Out of the Shadows, the second young adult novel. This was written by Justina Ireland. This continues the story from The Rising Storm. It doesn't have crossover. It is a sequel to The Rising Storm. There are events here they're completely separate that really flesh out the characters of Vernesh Duro and Reith Silas, especially. So if you're interested in the story of Vernesh Duro, this is worth reading. After that, you get into Phase 1's only audio drama, Tempest Runner. This is written by Cavan Scott. Deals with the Tempest Runner, Lorna D, and some of the aftermath of the Battle of Valo, along with what happens to some of the Tempest Runners in the Nile. You can read it in script form, or you can listen to the audio drama. Highly recommend the audio drama. I think it's much better than reading it in script. After that, you read The High Republic, number 9 through 10. The reason we had separated 6 through 8 and then 9 through 10, which also are all combined in the High Republic Volume 2 or the High Republic Omnibus, is because Lorna D makes an appearance in these, and it would kind of spoil some of the events that happen in Tempest Runner and how she gets to where she is in High Republic if you just read that whole Volume 2 separately from splitting it up. Then you read the High Republic Adventures 8 through 10. This has a story about Sav Maligan, who we talked about earlier, from the High Republic Adventures Phase 2. She is introduced technically here. The High Republic Adventures number 8 is collected in the High Republic Volume 2 trade paperback from IDW, and then 9 and 10 are collected in the Volume 3 trade paperback, which again, like Monster of Temple Peak, was only published overseas. The High Republic Adventures Galactic Bake Off Spectacular will also be collected in the High Republic Adventures Complete Phase 1. This is kind of just a fun little spin-off story. It would take place technically after High Republic Adventures number 10. You can get into Edge of Balance Volume 2, which did come out in Wave 3 of the High Republic Phase 1, but really ties more tightly to the Edge of Balance Volume 1. The Edge of Balance in general is kind of its own little universe within the High Republic. It doesn't cross over much. Sav Maligan makes an appearance in Volume 2, so we recommend you read it after you read 8 through 10 of the High Republic Adventures. Then you get into Trail of Shadows, which is a High Republic miniseries by Daniel Jose Older, published by Marvel. The first 3 issues set up really the mystery of the Jedi trying to figure out what are the Nameless and what is the Leveler. This whole adventure starts here in issues 1 through 3, and we recommend you do split up the series if you're going to read Trail of Shadows before you read The Fallen Star. But the last 2 will spoil some things that happen in The Fallen Star. You can get this in its own trade paperback called The High Republic Trail of Shadows, or you can get it collected in the Omnibus later this year. The High Republic number 11 you would read after this. This is a single issue that also deals with the Leveler and the Nameless, so it does make more sense to read it after that mystery is started in Trail of Shadows. This is collected in the High Republic Volume 3 or the High Republic Omnibus. Then you get in the High Republic Adventures 11 through 12. This is again collected in the High Republic Adventures Volume 3 trade paperback that you can only get overseas, but here you can get it in the complete collection. Then you read the annual. It tells stories from different female perspectives from High Republic Adventures, so it will tie into High Republic Adventures 11 through 12, as well as other stories that take place before it. After that, you get into the next Starlight story, Past Mistakes, again collected in the Starlight Stories hardcover. Then you would read Mission to Disaster, which is the last junior novel. This is also by Justina Ireland and does focus on Vernestra Rowe and Emery Kantaros again. This is kind of a prequel and build up to The Fallen Star. It did come out the same day digitally as The Fallen Star, but then you get into Claudia Gray's final adult novel in the High Republic Phase 1. This is The Fallen Star. Again, like The Rising Storm and Light of the Jedi, this is a fulcrum point for pretty much everything that happens in Phase 1 Wave 3, so you have to read this before you read pretty much anything else, otherwise that will spoil some of the events of what's going on here. Follow that up with The Battle of Starlight, which is from, again, Burryaga's perspective. This is a children's book that will tie into The Fallen Star. After that, you get into Eye of the Storm #1. Again, this can be found in the High Republic Volume 3 from Marvel or the Omnibus coming out later this year. Eye of the Storm, you could read these together, and if you do, I would recommend you read them last, but if you want to split them up and read them in the correct order, Eye of the Storm 1 here will give you a lot of background on the Evereni and all of Marchion Rowe's people in the lead up to why Marchion Rowe is the way he is, what his plan is, and why he has this plan specifically in The Fallen Star. Then you get into the High Republic number 12 through 15. Again, recommend you read them after The Fallen Star because they do tie in to that novel. Avar Kriss makes an appearance in that novel, and her perspective is given more concretely in this part of the High Republic comic. So you can get that in Volume 3 of the High Republic from Marvel or the Omnibus. Trail of Shadows number 4 through 5. Again, same reason, read it after here because it does tie into the Fallen Star. You can get that in its own trade paperback or the Omnibus as well. After that, you read Midnight Horizon, which does for the most part take place before the Fallen Star, but there are some things that spoil a bit of the plan for the Nile in the Fallen Star, so we recommend you read it after. The ending of the Midnight Horizon does tie into the Fallen Star, but the most of the first 3/4 do not. The Midnight Horizon is a little strange, though. It's written by Daniel Jose Older, and it ties in heavily to the High Republic Adventures. So if you've not read High Republic Adventures, you will not get the most out of this. It does feature Comac and Wreath, though, so it does tie into the past YA novels, but it heavily features Adventures characters. Then we recommend you read the final issue of High Republic Adventures from Phase 1, number 13. Again, this takes place after the big character arcs in Midnight Horizon, but it serves as kind of a final epilogue of sorts for Adventures in Phase 1. That can be found in Adventures Volume 3, which was only released overseas, or the complete Phase 1 coming out later this year. The final Starlight story, Starlight Shadows Remain. It's collected in the Starlight Stories. Check that out there. Then you would read Eye of the Storm number 2. It is found in the High Republic Volume 3 or the High Republic Omnibus. This is the epilogue to The Fallen Star. So do not read anything Eye of the Storm. If you want to read these back to back, read Eye of the Storm here. Do not read this before The Fallen Star, otherwise it will spoil almost the entire book. And so you gotta read this here, but we highly recommend it. Again, we put it in our essential reads. It's a great epilogue, and it sends you forward into Phase 3. So that was a long breakdown of the entire recommended reading order, but again, this is how you'd read it, and it's very convoluted and messy, but that's going to do it for our video of the High Republic reading guide. Thank you so much for watching. This will conclude our High Republic Phase 2 coverage. We will probably review at some point the Tales of Light and Life anthology series coming out later this year, but again, that's kind of like a Phase 2, Phase 3 combo story. So eventually when that comes out, we'll check it out. But this will conclude Phase 2 stuff. Hope you guys have enjoyed all our coverage. Again, check out all of our reviews. You can find the playlist with every review for everything in Phase 2. We'll have all that up on the channel. And if you want to check out our tier list ranking every single story of Phase 1 and 2, you can also see that on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you all next time.